Today's podcast was recorded on location at the MX Factory located in Lakeway, Texas, with legal rights advocate Eddie Craig.
You are being lied to, and I'm not the one that's doing it. The people that you're trusting as your source of information are a corrupted, polluted, poisonous fountain of non-knowledge.
This is Hidden IQ.
Everything's rolling.
Eddie, what do you think about this place?
I like this place. I could actually live here. Throw me a pillow up under that pool table and I'd be a happy camper.
Yeah, the MX Factory, this place is a lot of fun. I would love to have this as my backyard to go play in.
Yeah.
But let me ask you something. I've got a pet peeve, which has always been property taxes. And I've never understood why I can buy my home, I can pay for my home and own it, but I've got to pay some municipality or government a property tax for life based on the value of it. And if I don't pay that, it's confiscated from me. How does that happen? Because I'd researched a little bit of this and came up with a land patent, which I brought with me. And I don't see anywhere in the land patent where the state or anyone else can attach that property.
That's true. All land in Texas that was surrendered by the state to people who purchased or settled on the land was given over to those through the means of a land patent. And the language of the patent is very clear. The state waives all claims to the property now and forever. And that includes when that property is transferred to an heir or an assign. And an assign simply means that it's sold to someone outside of the family for some fee or some remuneration of some kind, or traded or whatever, and they become the new owner. And thus they can have that portion of the plot of land named in the land patent into their name. And then they have to carry a land patent forward in their name for that parcel of the original patent. That's what the assigns means on that. Now, the heirs, exactly what it means. You can leave the land to anyone you want, and the same rules that are agreed to in the land patent applies. Now, when these land patents were issued, they were signed by the governor of the state, whoever that was at the time. And the language is extremely clear. It's a binding contract on the state that surrenders all claims of any kind to that land forever. The way they're getting around that is, and besides that, the Texas Constitution specifically prohibits the state from levying a by-value tax on property.
By-value tax meaning?
By-value meaning that whatever they assess the value of the property at, they then charge you a percentage of that as the tax, which means that the taxes are based upon the value of what you own. They're not apportioned, they're not equal. If you own more than this guy, then you're going to pay more than this guy. And if your land happens to be situated right next door but valued at twice as much, then you're going to pay twice as much in taxes the way they're doing it. It's a completely bogus system. The way they've gotten away with it is that the Texas Land Office has forsaken its duty in assisting the public who purchases a piece of land from carrying forward a land patent in their own name.
Okay, so this land patent, this is the one I pulled up on my own property. This should have been passed down. This, in other words, every time that this property changed hands, this should have been what was passed down or signed over to the heir or purchaser of the property, right?
Let's say that this original patent dealt with 100 acres, okay? So,
and it did. This dealt with a larger piece of land, and I had everything investigated to show how it was brought down to the 1 acre that I own.
So this patent covers the entire original 100 acres.
Okay.
So if you turn around and sold me 1 acre, okay, once the assessment was done that plotted out that 1 acre from the rest of this original 100, then I would have needed a land patent granting me ownership of that 1 acre out of this 100 as an assign. Since I'm not an heir to you, I'm purchasing it. That would make me an assign under the terms of the patent. That portion of the land patent parcel is then carried forward in my name. Now I get a new land patent under the same terms carried forward in my name for that specific 1 acre parcel.
Okay, so my next question is, if I were to, if the original owner has 100 acres and he's going to sell 100 1-acre parcels, where are the 100 new land patents that describe each acre? Who's going to create that document?
That was the entire purpose of the Texas Land Office. The Texas Land Office, that was their designated duty, was to do the necessary checking on the original land patents for parcels of lands that are purchased as an assign under the terms of that patent, and issuing new patents to those assigns for the purchase. And then that property, once again, under the same terms of the state waives all rights and claims forever to that property, is carried forward to them. They can divvy up that land any way they want in their own way, under their own patent from that time forward, including selling it back to the original patent holder, who could then have it redone back into their original patent if they bought the land back, for instance. So that's the way it is supposed to function. That's how it was set up to function. And the terms of a land patent in Texas are, there is no ambiguity. All rights and claims are forever relinquished by the state. Therefore, if the state has no rights or claims to that land, the state cannot assess a tax on that land. They have no claim to that land in order to tax it of any kind. Since the Texas Constitution forbids the state from doing an ad valorem, a by-value property tax, that would then also prohibit the state from allowing a political subdivision of the state, which is what municipalities and counties are, to become an assessor in their stead. The city or the county has no more authority to assess a by-value tax than the state does, because taxation under the Constitution is to be done by the state, not the local political subdivision.
Now you're talking about the state constitution.
Correct.
I think what I've always been under the impression is that the taxation, the protection, or the fact that they can't touch it would come from the federal government, but that's not so.
Nothing in the federal Constitution that deals with property taxes. Why? Because there's nothing in the federal Constitution that authorizes the federal government to operate within the territorial borders of the states, except for in relation to the 18 enumerated powers the federal Constitution gives them. As far as taxation goes, duties, excise, and imposts, okay? That's the taxes that the federal government is allowed to create, and the kind they are allowed.
Examples?
For instance, foreign countries that send goods into the U.S., U.S. companies that are exporting goods to other countries, duties and imposts. Those taxes on property going into or out of the country that either are shipped out from being produced here or being brought in from production in other countries. Mm-hmm. That's to keep the market levels fair between foreign monies and our monies. It wouldn't do us any good to have our economy undermined by having everything imported at half the price. So the duties and imposts are meant to kind of level that playing field for American businesses versus foreign businesses. But those are the taxes specifically authorized by the federal Constitution. The federal Constitution does not name an income tax as an authorized tax. That's why the courts have never ruled that an income tax is a valid tax. They've always said that the income tax is literally an excise tax. And because it's an excise tax.
And what's the difference? What's an excise tax in a?
It's been
what's
a while
the third
since I've
grade
studied.
English? Is it more just on
an excise
on
tax
commerce?
is basically a privilege tax. It's basically a tax on the right to engage in some privileged activity. Okay, the difference between what we do and what a corporation does, for instance, is everything a corporation does is, as a creature of law, is granted by privilege of the law itself. A corporation can only act in accordance with law because it in itself is a creature of law. The law brought it into existence, it gave it birth, and it controls its entire lifespan. Whereas we have inherent rights to do certain things. We have the right to be self-sustaining. We have the right to engage in a profitable business of our own. We have the right to do all these things without any government permission of any kind. So since we have a right to earn a living and survive, The courts ruled that if the government has the power to tax it, then the government has the power to tax it in any amount the government wants, even up to 100% or 110%.
Which would destroy you.
Exactly. And that's exactly the words the court used. The government can tax it even to the point of its destruction. That's exactly what the court case says on it. So that is exactly why an income tax as a direct tax on the people would never fly, because we have a right.
Now wait, did the courts allowed it though? They've allowed that?
No. You have to understand how the courts actually word their opinions.
Or are the courts saying you cannot do it because you can destroy someone? So the differences between an excise tax and a direct tax and rights and privileges. I remember reading in Dave Champion's book, Federal Income Tax, Shattering the Myths. He talked about rights and privileges, and he really made a point in that book, especially at the beginning, to keep those two things in the back of your mind when you were looking really at anything, of taxes of any kind. And so what would be your third grade explanation of rights and privileges and what those have to do with taxation?
Well, a right is something that you can do without any permission of any kind from anyone for any reason. Okay? It's either inherent in you or it's granted to you by some means of the law or just as an individual as a whole. For instance, the right to life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness as guaranteed by the Bill of Rights in the federal Constitution.
So the Bill of Rights is what's given us
It doesn't
rights.
give you those rights.
No.
It enumerates a protection of those rights as being naturally inherent in all individuals.
Granted by God then.
Correct.
That's where that comes from.
It says it right there, by our Creator, okay? They're not granted by government. They're not granted by the people of the state, which is who granted the power of the Constitution itself. No one in my state or any other state granted me these rights. I had them at birth, as do you and everyone else. The privileges come in when the thing that you are trying to do or want to do requires an outside permission or an outside set of rules governing when, where, and how you can do it. That's the difference between a privilege and a right. The American people have the right to do virtually anything. The only time that our rights are nullified is if we're attempting to use those rights to harm another or their property. At that point, we're not exercising a right. We're attempting to violate the rights of someone else. So the old adage being that my right to swing my fist stops immediately before it encounters your nose. Okay? That's kind of the way to look at it. It's not until I actually touch or harm you in some way that my ability to exercise that right ceases, and I've become an offender rather than someone exercising a right. And this is the same thing when it comes to any form of privilege versus a right. The government cannot tax a right because, as we said before, if they have the power to tax it, they have the power to set the price of the tax so high that you cannot engage in that activity. So if you have a right to do something and the government then has a right to tax it, they can say, well, every time you do it, you got to pay us a $10 million tax.
So the right to tax at all is null and void then?
Yes and no.
In that situation?
As far as the
Against
people
a
are
right.
concerned, absolutely. Okay. The courts have even said that the government has no power to tax a right and convert it into a privilege, which the person must then get a license to exercise. The courts have said that repeatedly in case after case after case.
So how do they tax an individual's property, and how do they tax an individual's income? How is it that we are paying these taxes and these taxes are being enforced upon us? How is that happening?
They're going to tell you it's in the law, and that's going to be a lie, okay? The way they do it is fraud, and it's a fraud through misrepresentation. Which is what fraud is by default. It's a misrepresentation of facts and circumstances in order to get someone to part with something of value in exchange for something that doesn't have the value that's being sold, okay? What they're doing is telling you the law requires you to pay these taxes, and that's a blatant lie. The law cannot supersede the Constitution of the state or of the Bill of Rights at the federal level. Can't violate either one of them. If it does, the law is null and void. Now, a land patent by any other name is a contract between the state that issues the patent and the purchaser of the land to which that patent applies. And let me tell you exactly what the language of this contract says. Okay, it says that the state of Texas, governor of the state of aforesaid, by virtue of the power vested in me by law and in accordance with the laws of said state, in such case made and provided, do by these presents grant to, and the name of the property owner, his heirs or assigns forever, there's that key word, forever, and this one was particularly for 320 acres, okay? And then it gives the full legal description of that plot of land, and then down here it says, hereby relinquishes to him, and who's doing the relinquishing? The state of Texas via the authority of the governor as granted by the state. Hereby relinquishes to him, the land purchaser, the said and the purchaser's name, and his heirs or assigns forever all the right and title in and to said land, heretofore held and possessed by the said state. Okay, and I do hereby issue this letter patent for the same. This is a binding contract. The courts have ruled time and time again, state and federal, that when the government engages in commerce, it ceases to be and act as a government. It becomes as any other incorporated entity engaging in contracts of any kind.
Wow.
Therefore, the government does not exist in this document. The corporation of the state of Texas exists in this document as relinquishing any claims to this land forever. If they have no claim to it, no title to it, they have no access to it, no rights to it, no nothing, then where do they claim the right to tax it? It says they have no right. We relinquished all right and title. So what right are they claiming allows them to tax this land, ever, in any way, shape, or form? And if the state itself by contract is prohibited from doing so, and by state constitution is prohibited from doing so, how then can a political subdivision of that same state, which is what a county or a municipality is, then acquire a power that the state has no power to grant? Because the Constitution does not say taxes may be levied by a county. It does not say taxes may be levied by a municipality. It says that the state is the one that levies the taxes. And then it specifically forbids the state from doing so in this particular case. And then by contract, the state reinforces that through the land patent to ever do it again. They have no legal leg to stand on in relation to property taxes on private property. Now, when it comes to property owned by legal entities, corporations, LLCs, things of that nature.
Any business, really.
Any business, as that entity is a creature of the law and everything it does is based upon privilege and not right, they can tax the living daylights out of that entity any way they want to. But they can't tax our property, not without violating the contract. And to this day, the one place every property tax case in the state of Texas has failed on is to go to court and sue for breach of contract. No one has gone to court and sued for breach of contract under the land patent.
And they would be suing not the state, but the...
They would be suing the state of Texas. And they would actually be suing the comptroller of the state of Texas.
Okay.
Okay?
But the reason I asked that is you mentioned earlier that they were acting in the capacity of a
legal entity.
Of a legal entity.
Right.
So but
the
you're not
state
suing
of
that
Texas
legal,
is a legal,
the
entity.
legal entity.
There's an incorporated the state of Texas.
Okay.
However, Texas is not the one levying the tax. Who is? The county or the municipality.
So it's almost like you're having a third party that has nothing to do with anything coming in and taxing you.
Bingo. The state is authorizing someone who is not a party to the land patent to collect a tax on its behalf that it itself cannot do. That's fraud. That is misrepresentation and fraud.
Okay,
Charles, what do you think about
well,
that?
this is all, it's, for people listening, there's a lot of information here that is hard to follow. I'm having a hard time following it. So can we break it down into, there's a ton of people that own property and pay property taxes. Why are they paying those taxes? And when you talked about this earlier, you were saying the differences between owning the land patent and owning a title. And when you title your property, that's where you get into hot water.
That's what I wanted to ask you about next.
So we need to break it down in a simple form for the average person out there who owns a piece of property. They don't own their property really unless they have the patent. Is that correct?
Correct. And that's what I was going to get into after we got the explanation of the patent out of the way, is that the fraud that's actually being perpetrated is when you are told that your land has to be issued to you via title rather than patent.
That's what I wanted to ask.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because is that a contract that you're getting into then? With
No.
titling your property? No.
No, it's a lease agreement.
A lease agreement.
Read your title.
And so
under your name on your property title, how does it have you listed? Does it say owner or does it say occupant?
I don't remember. I can't recall exactly, but I'm going to look when I
I've
get
seen
back.
them listed both ways. But then again, you have to look at how the state is defining the term owner in relation to that title, because there are two kinds of owners in this case. There's the legal owner, and then there's the equity owner. The guy holding this is the equity owner. The guy holding the title is the legal owner. What's the difference? The difference between a legal owner and an equity owner is that you have the right to do anything with the legal property ownership except transfer the right to destroy. Okay, for instance,
Explain that.
Okay. If you go buy a car rather than lease a car, you can drive that car off a cliff, you can set fire to it, and as long as you don't try to claim insurance on it, no one can touch you.
As long as I own the car.
As long as you own it.
So I'm the owner. Okay.
Right.
Now I'm the.
But if
now
you
I
lease it and you set fire to it, the company that leased it to you can come after you for everything of the
burning their
value of
property.
that car. Exactly.
So now in property, what's happened is we fraudulently been twisted in such a manner that we are none other than leasing the property?
That's exactly what they're telling you. When they tell you that the law allows them to do this, it does. Just like when they tell you the income tax law allows them to do this, it does. If you have allowed yourself to be put into the category to which that particular tax applies or that lease applies. That land title makes you the legal owner, but you're a renter, you're a leaseholder, you're not an equity owner with the right to transfer or destroy that property.
So I've purchased my property, I've written a check for it, and I own it. But the minute I title that property, I've given up ownership to the state.
You've told the state you don't own it, you're leasing it, you're renting
But
it.
I've signed ownership to them. Are they holding it against
No.
debts of the state?
You've assigned them rent collection rights when you title it to them. That's basically what you're doing.
So if I'm leasing it, and they're able to collect lease payments, or rent, however you want to call, whatever you want to name that tax, then where'd the owner go? Who's the owner?
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask. So if you have
you ever brought the
title,
land patent forward in your name for the
Right.
parcel of land you're on?
No.
That's
was never brought
why
forward.
the owner doesn't exist.
So it doesn't
in this
exist.
case.
There's no
Okay?
owner per se.
Oh, no. The owner is the person whose name's on the original patent if that patent has never been carried forward from that
And
owner
he's
for that
dead.
parcel of land. Okay? Well, his heirs control it at that point because they would have inherited from his estate if he's dead.
so if the patent isn't transferred to the next owner, in your case, you don't have a patent on your property, but you have a title to your property. So you don't really own your property. It still belongs to the people that own the patent or their kids. Could they come forward and say, get off?
Without a bill of sale, yes.
So the only thing that protects me is my bill of sale.
Yes.
Okay. What happens in a matter where somebody uses a bank? Has anything changed? Does dynamic change if someone has a mortgage where the bank has come in and financed the property? Does any of that change anything that we've talked about?
Well, it's like anything else. When you get a mortgage from a bank, the bank is the one that holds clear title to the property at that point. And they're, as the one who holds the property and who agreed to sell it to you for a certain amount of remuneration in funds, they have an interest in that property until those funds are paid in full. So basically, you are co-owners, okay? But they have greater claim than you do because they're the original holder. They are the equity holder, in fact, and you are the legal holder until the time that mortgage is paid. There again is the difference. When the bank has it, the bank is the equity owner. You are just the legal owner when the mortgage is in effect. Once the mortgage is paid, that's why people used to have mortgage burning parties. You remember back in the good old days?
I've heard of that.
50s,
I've heard of that.
60s, 70s?
I'm not that old, Eddie.
When you
Come
paid,
on.
when you paid off the last note on your house, you threw a big party and you threw the mortgage in the fireplace, and everybody was there to celebrate it. Why? Because that piece of paper is what gave anyone who held it in their hands a claim to the piece of property you were sitting in. That's why it got burned.
Now, the bank, though, they're no better off than the individual because they're still responsible for taxes. If they get stuck with the property, they're nothing more than leasing it also.
When you are part of an organization that can manufacture money out of thin air, what do you care what the taxes on something you're holding is?
That makes sense.
Okay? The bank gets any money,
which is a whole nother discussion.
Exactly. The bank gets any money for what it pays for through money it acquires from the Federal Reserve, which prints it up out of thin air. This is something we discussed at length in our movie,
in
The
the
Grand
documentary.
Scam.
Yeah, you did an excellent job of that.
Well, thanks.
Wow. I mean, could you imagine if the state, with what's happened over the years and all the money that's brought in just through the residential taxes on residential property or private property, I should say, what would happen if all that disappeared because they weren't able to collect it because they're not entitled to it?
I would have to say that in Dave's book, Dave says that the income tax is the greatest financial scam on the face of the planet, and he's right. The second biggest one is property taxes. And the only reason that's the case is because not everybody owns property to be taxed. But everyone who does is getting fleeced just as bad as those paying income taxes that they don't owe.
So, before we get any further, tell me more about your show, Eddie.
Well, I'm a co-host on Rule of Law Radio, which you can find on the internet at ruleoflawradio.com or logosradionetwork.com. And what we do there is we spend all of our free time doing legal research, helping people with legal issues. The radio show is a call-in show. I do it live, and we have people calling in with legal questions on all kinds of issues, some of which are even property taxes like we've just been discussing. I've been helping a gentleman in Arizona with a property tax issue. He's trying to sue there. And one of the major differences in what Arizona did versus here, all the land in Arizona was a federal territory. All land patents in Arizona are issued by the federal government, not the state. Whereas here in Texas, since Texas was originally and the only state that was its own sovereign nation before it became a state, Texas issues its own land patents.
Is Texas the only state that did that? Or were there other states that were their own sovereign nation?
I can't say. I've never purchased property in another state other than a home in Colorado, and I never actually looked at it because I just bought the house and land it was on, but I didn't ever look at it as a patent issue at the time because I wasn't going to stay there.
I can't remember. Are we still a sovereign nation, and that's just ignored?
Well, it depends upon how you look at the original.
Now you're asking about Texas.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, how you look at the original bringing of Texas into the states. According to some folks that's done the legal research, The annexation of Texas by the United States was never done according to the terms of the original agreement, which of course would mean that Texas is still an independent sovereign nation and not a part of the United States as a state. And in fact, there was a big brouhaha with a collection of people known as the Republic of Texas over that very issue. So much so, in fact, that a couple of them are in prison now for taking hostages of state employees until the President of the United States would agree to meet with them. What Bill Clinton actually did, who was president at the time,
back up a little bit and I didn't hear this story.
I've never heard about the
Tell me what happened.
hostages.
What happened was that a couple of the leaders for this group held a couple of state
What's the name of
employees.
this group?
The Republic of Texas.
So that's a group of individuals. How many?
Well, right now it's dozens to 100, 200,
just
something
small
like
group.
that. It's
Okay.
a small group. But they have done a lot of historical research on Texas history, the annexation of Texas by the United States back in 1845 and so on and so forth. And what it turns out is that the actual historical records show that neither the Texas Congress, we had our own president and our own Congress at that time.
Really?
And neither our Congress and president nor that of the United States Congress and its president ever held the required annexation vote to make Texas a part of the states.
And the vote coming from Texas?
Never happened. The Texas
they never even
Congress
took a vote?
never voted on it. And neither...
About what year time frame was this?
1845. The problem is that proving that the paperwork did not support the situation that was being promulgated to the public as we're all part of the United States, the Republic of Texas folks took it upon themselves to bring this to light. And they did it in the most extreme measure they believed they could to bring it out and gain exposure for it. So they took a couple of state employees hostage and demanded the President of the United States make an appearance and talk to them about these records.
When did they do this?
Well, Bill Clinton was president because he's the one that appointed a Texas Department of Public Safety appointee to act in his stead and actually signed an agreement with the people of the Republic of Texas that clearly stated that they were not in the wrong and that the state had no claims over them. But because they took state employees hostage, the federal government could step on them and did, and threw a couple of them in prison.
Yeah, taking hostages is
Yeah.
not really a good idea. It muddies the waters.
It's making their point,
Well,
but
in all fairness to those folks, the people they took hostage were there trying to take their property illegally under a tax assessment that they didn't owe.
oh, well, then it makes sense.
now-
Okay, I get it.
And they
I
decided.
have felt like that myself.
And that's when they were saying, nope, enough's enough. The law does not support this. The rules of nations does not support this. We've got to do something about it. And so they acted. And in all honesty, check any period of American history. Nothing important in history has ever changed except when it was engaged in by a small group of people unwilling to go along to get along.
Wow.
That has always been what has changed and made history. It has never been a mass movement of anyone.
That's where the old saying comes from, very few fight the battle.
Exactly.
In every instance, whether it's war, whether it's a cause.
The Revolutionary War.
Right, they say it's
Out
like
of
3%.
all of the English peoples that were in the colonies here in the States when we fought England for our independence, it was 3 to 5% of the total population that went to war with England. The rest of them sat on their thumbs and waited to see what happened.
Waited to see which direction they were going to be going the next day.
We will go with whichever wind wins.
Yeah,
Yeah, I pointed that out to you. You'll see that today, the 3%ers.
yeah.
It harkens back to that very idea that there was 3% of the population that fought in the revolution.
Right.
And even to this day, about 3% of the population are service members.
Wow.
Yeah. And because of all that.
And the rest just go along, which is really
Because
how
it's
they get
easier.
away with most of things.
Exactly.
It's just the easy way. It's path of least resistance.
When it comes time to fight these battles on their battleground, which is the courts, and they have complete and absolute control over, That's where they ensure that the people that sit on the jury that's going to judge your argument and your basis for doing things are the dumbest people available. They do not know a right from a privilege. They don't understand why they can do something or why they can't. They simply look at it and go, if I have to do it, you have to do it.
Mm-hmm.
They never look at the possibility that they don't have to do it, but they prefer to do it because it's easier.
It's easier.
It's less problematic, and nobody comes knocking on the door saying, why aren't you doing it?
Yeah, that's interesting. We were talking about that the other day, and it points to what you're saying. People aren't educated in even basic civics today.
Right.
In school, kids growing up. And I don't think I was given a lot of information too, but at least I still had some of that residue from the older folks in my life and some of the research I did coming into college. But basically what you're saying is there are very few people that even know why we have an electoral college.
Well,
Absolutely.
Exactly. Yeah. And you just stated something a minute ago, Charles.
Yeah.
You just said that the older people in your life described it to you.
Mm-hmm.
And that's exactly what John Lackow described brilliantly in the documentary, was we had a duty
Mm-hmm.
to pass that down to our children, teach that to our children, not expect the government to do it or expect a school to do it.
Well, they're not going to do it.
They're not going to, exactly. But we had a duty to that, and nobody's done that.
No.
Nobody doesn't do that anymore.
Well, it gets weeded out of the collective consciousness,
diluted. It's
generation to generation to generation.
Whereas now the generation thinks socialism is wonderful, and they don't even know what the hell it is.
No, they don't understand.
They don't know what the government, they don't know
it.
that when the government is paying for something, take the word government out and put somebody else is paying for your health care or paying for your schooling. It's not the government, it's
just
somebody
the phrase
else.
free education, free college education, or free health care. It's not free. Somebody's paying for
Right.
it. We're paying.
So it goes back to where we don't teach, we don't pass down.
Why do you suppose that is?
They don't want you to understand. They do not want you to understand what they're doing and how they're doing it. And they do this the same way a magician does his magic act.
Sure.
It's misdirection.
Sure.
Back to the example of what I was saying with the land patent. If you want to know the difference between your title and your patent, then go look up the two legal definitions associated with equity ownership versus legal ownership. And you can find that in any good legal dictionary, Black's Law, Bouvier's, any of them. And they'll show you very clearly that the difference is that the legal owner has all the rights to possession and use, but not to the transfer or destruction of the property. Whereas the equity owner has every right in every way to do anything with that property they desire. That's the difference. And because they have created you on paper as the legal owner instead of the equity owner, they come to you and say, because you only possess this property, we're going to act on behalf of the owner to ensure that everything's taken care of. So you're going to pay us for that. As the occupant or the legal owner, you're going to pay us these property taxes for the service we're providing on making sure that the owner's taken care of.
So if you have the patent, do you need to title your property? If you buy it outright, you don't need a bank to deal with it.
No. The problem with the title is that if your mortgage agreement requires that the property be titled for the purposes of getting insurance and all this other things that mortgages normally require to be had on any property you're buying, then you are under a contractual obligation via the mortgage to get the property titled. Now, and that's the only way you can get it without buying it outright. Why? Because once the patent is issued in your name, the bank would have no claim over it. Therefore, you wouldn't have to finish paying the mortgage.
You wouldn't have to finish. Mm-hmm.
So they can't relinquish equity ownership to you via the patent while that mortgage is still outstanding, or they lose any control to collect on the property. So they're going to insist that you get the property titled. Now, what was the original legal reason titles existed? Exactly that. They were the agreement that showed that there was someone else with an interest in that same piece of property who had an obligation owed them on that property. Once that obligation was paid in full, the title, i.e. the mortgage, was destroyed. And the land patent carried forward to give full equity ownership to the person who paid off the loan that bought the property, and now they own it.
Try to describe that. I follow you. So, but how do you simplify that a little bit? The title, that would, a title would originally occur when you have a mortgage in the bank, and so I understand there would be a title given to the person with the carrying the loan, or not carrying the loan, but that is taking out the loan. Correct?
Okay. Yeah. Something like that.
Am I on the right track?
I'll break this down the simplest way possible. Let's say that you have a Nintendo gaming system, and I want to buy it, okay? And you want to sell it to me. But you agree to let me buy it in payments. And so we sign an agreement that says that I have to pay you this much over this many time period payments, or even sooner if I want to pay the whole thing in full. And if I miss any of those payments, then you have the right to repossess it until I either pay in full, or until I say, I'm done, I don't want to continue this, you do whatever you want with it. That's the kind of deal. So what we do is we have that agreement, which is our mortgage for that game station, okay? And it also acts as my title. Because of that agreement, I have the right to possession and use of that gaming station as long as I'm making the payments. If I ever fail to make the payment, you have the right to take that same piece of paperwork and come to me and say, I need to take possession of this myself because you've missed a payment on it. Okay? Now, if I bring those payments up to date, and our contract says I can do that, then you give the property back and we resume the way we were. But it also says that if you have the right to demand payment in full if I miss that payment, and I don't pay you in full, then full equity ownership goes back to you. Whereas I only had legal ownership of that. I could only use it.
So let's break it down a little. Let's back up a little bit on what you're saying. Let's just back it up, not put in different parameters of the contract, but let's keep it really simple.
All right.
I have the Nintendo device. You'd like to purchase it from me on payments. I am now, for all intents and purposes, the bank.
Right.
I own the so-called land patent to that Nintendo device.
Right.
You're going to take possession of that to use like you see fit and start making payments to me. But now I've issued you a title. Is that correct?
You've issued me a piece of paper that says I have the right to possess and use the property.
Possess and use the property. And you're welcome to sell it or do whatever you like, but you do have to pay me off.
No, that's the thing. As legal owner, I do not have the right of disposition or transfer.
Okay, so you have to...
I cannot sell it. Without your consent, I cannot turn around and sell that piece of property I'm buying from you.
Because you have to pay me first.
Correct.
Okay. So that being said, that you have a title, I still hold the patent on that Nintendo device, and you pay me for it in full. It's no longer, I'm now conveying all of that Nintendo device to you. Mm-hmm. But what's missing now in today's world is that patent, that land patent on a piece of property or that Nintendo device doesn't exist anymore. We're now by all rights. I should be signing it over to you.
Here's the thing. You do. When you give me that bill of sale, you sign over that piece of property to me via that patent.
Okay.
But it becomes my responsibility to carry that patent forward in my name. Otherwise, it remains in your name, and I'm still only the legal owner.
So it's my responsibility then to carry this patent forward?
No.
For your property.
When you transfer the property to me, it becomes my responsibility to carry the patent forward.
But that's what I'm getting at. This property, my home, was conveyed to me, so is it my responsibility to carry the patent forward?
It is.
That's what I'm getting at.
Yes.
So how do you do that? I mean,
so exactly, how would I do that? Or is it,
well,
I mean,
as
they
I
make
said,
it virtually impossible.
The Texas Land Office was the entity originally created to do that. That's its entire reason for existing, hence Land Office, okay?
Is there anything in their rules, regulations, bylaws, whatever you want to call it, that spells that out, that's what they're supposed to do, that someone would be able to point to and say, no, you can't refuse me. It says right here.
Yeah, you could go back to the original bill that created it, and it will tell you right there in the title, the caption of that bill, that explains why that legislation is being made, why it's there. It'll tell you right there that this set of laws or enactments is for the express purpose of this. Okay? And so the land office was created to give people a place to go to get the necessary documentation for when land was transferred. That was its whole reason for existing. Otherwise, who would do it? Not everybody who bought a piece of land was going to walk into the governor's office every single day and have the governor sign the paperwork. That was not going to fly. Okay? So what do? They created an agency of the government to act in his stead to do that. Okay? And so that's what the land office was intended to do.
There's also a number of other things associated with land patents, to my understanding, like mineral rights, which don't always transfer unless it's specified out. Is that correct? I mean, there's the land proper, but there's also the mineral rights.
Technically, under the terms of a land patent, you own everything above and below that parcel of land.
Oh, okay.
It does not make any distinction. Do you see any language in here whatsoever that deals with minerals?
That separates it, yeah, nothing.
There is no language in here. The word mineral does not even appear in this patent. Okay?
So is it assumed?
Now, you can sell the rights to someone else to access those minerals, and that it's a contractual agreement, but it doesn't nullify the patent.
So if you have somebody who allocates mineral rights to somebody else and retains the land proper, and then this person sells that property, the person buying the property only has the land, but they don't have the mineral rights because this person can come in and mine for coal or whatever they're going to do. Is that correct?
Potentially so. It depends upon what the terms of the original contract are. Originally, under the terms of a patent, the patent owner owned everything above the land to the edge of space and everything to the center of the earth in a diminishing pinpoint around the territorial borders of his property. So everything above and below the ground, they owned. That was the terms of the original patent. When you get into things like underground waterways, above ground rivers and things of that nature, this is where the federal government came in and established commercial jurisdiction over these navigable waterways because they could be used for commercial purposes between the states. If that river crosses state boundaries and ships of commerce can pass along that river and cross those boundaries, then the federal government determined that they had a power over that river because it was something commercial. And so they used the Commerce Clause to engage in activities within the states by creating these types of finagles of the actual original intent on what that meant, so that they can intercede.
What happens in the case, though, let's say I have a small river 5 feet wide, comes through my property and runs through Charles' property and a number of other individuals' properties.
Again,
I can't dam my property up, for instance. I can't dam up the water.
You can dam it up, but you cannot permanently stop the flow. You can create a reservoir of water, but you have to provide a way for that water to continue on its natural course. So you can actually build yourself a holding tank and allow an overflow to continue that flow of water back out of it, but you can't dam it up and deprive your surrounding neighbors of water that is otherwise a public resource. Now, that's the moral and ethical issue of it. Technically speaking, you could do anything you want with the water that's on your property. The question then becomes, do you have the right to keep it from leaving your property? And that's where the federal government, due to the old range wars and water wars and everything for cattle and all that, where they got into the fray and stopped these rich ranchers that were coming in and taking all the water so that everybody else had to pay them or sell out in order to get water to the property, and stopped all that by declaring them navigable waterways. If they can flow from here to there and anything of commerce can be transferred down that flow of water, is considered a navigable waterway.
So to switch gears a little bit, back to titles, and titles are listed under different categories. One of the things is if you ask somebody, about their home and it's checked in the box that it's a residential property, everyone assumes that that means residential means my home.
And
But
it very well
what-
could. But you have to understand what the legal definition of a resident is.
So what are the different categories first, and then tell me what the definition is.
Well, it may vary in title by state, but basically you have residential, you have commercial, and you have industrial. Those are your zoning issues relating to these different types of buildings and businesses that can operate within a particular area. But when it comes to residential property, which is how most state constitutions and most taxing authorities list property of any kind, the issue there becomes understanding what the legal meaning of resident is versus domicile. The courts, and I've got a blog up on my legal blog, an article on my legal blog, and on there I've got an article dealing with Texas juries. And in that, I go into great detail and cite the court cases and rulings and opinions on the differences between a resident and someone who is domiciled. Someone can have...
Let me hold you up for just
Okay.
1 second. Is domicile a category on a property tax?
No.
Okay, go ahead.
The courts say over and over that the major distinction is that a person can only have one domicile, their permanent forever home. Now they can make that home anywhere they want, anytime they want, but there can only be one. A residence, however, they can have multiple residences, and those residences can be anywhere in any place at any time. Out of all these residences, only one can be established as a permanent domicile. So the difference there is transitory. A residence is considered transitional. It's transitory. It's in a state of flux. You're there sometime, you're not there other times. Whereas your domicile is always your go home to place. It's always the home. And the court cases on this are numerous. And it goes over and over again. There is a very clear legal distinction. The state cannot tax a domicile because you have a right to have a domicile. Okay? A home is everyone's right. If they have the means to acquire it, it's theirs, just like on this land patent. You acquire the land is yours. What you do with that land, what you build upon that land is all yours. You have a right to do anything on that property you wish except harm someone else with it. Whereas in a residency, if you look at it from the way the courts have ruled resident actually applies, you're talking about commercial buildings where people rent apartments. You're talking about places that are for rent to tenants, okay? That they're used to raise an income for the individual that owns them, but the people that live there are there on a temporary leased basis.
So residential is the same thing as a commercial activity.
Bingo. Okay?
It's another word for commercial.
Your home is your domicile.
So there's nothing on a tax record that shows anything to do with a home.
That's correct. They try to classify every piece of non-commercial property.
Has anyone ever tried to fight that and say, hey, wait, where's my...
Again, even if they have, it's not the correct way to do it. You will have 1,000 times more difficulty in proving the distinction applies to your piece of property between domicile and residence than you will to go in with a land patent and sue them for breach of contract. The state cannot tax this property because of the land patent. It's very, very clear in the terms of the land patent. If the state cannot tax it, it cannot delegate a power to a local political subdivision to do what it cannot do on its behalf. Because who gets half of the property tax? The state. The state has no right to levy it, then how can the state be getting half of it? The only way they can do it is by letting the political subdivision act as its agent. Well, if the state is forbidden to do it directly, it cannot do it by agency either.
It can't authorize anyone else to do it.
So what are you saying? Are you saying that all property tax is illegal? Or
All
it's a
property
fraud,
taxes on private property are absolutely unconstitutional. and they are being assessed in violation of the actual law. Why do I say that? Because it does not matter how the law is written, the law itself must abide by the limitations placed upon the legislature by the Constitution of the state. So
no matter what law is created, if it violates the Constitution, what the Constitution authorizes, if the Constitution doesn't authorize it, that law can never be valid. Is that what?
Yes and no. The courts are setting it up so that the Constitution, when it comes to a state, they claim the state government can do anything the Constitution doesn't specifically forbid it to do, unlike the federal government, which can't do anything it isn't expressly told it can do.
Okay.
So they reverse the role of the Constitution at the state level. But here's the deal. We're back to the rights and privileges thing, okay? If you have the right to own that property, which the land patent says you do, and the state has none, which the land patent says they don't, and it's a contract they signed, they're stuck with it. At that point, they become a commercial entity engaging in contractual, negotiable commerce, and they're bound by the contracts they signed. And this is one they signed. So you don't go in arguing residence and domicile. You go in and argue breach of contract.
Right at the beginning, yes.
Property taxes on private property, not all property, but private property for which there is no mortgage or anything and you own it, is absolutely unconstitutional in Texas. Therefore, if it's unconstitutional, it's illegal. And it doesn't matter who's trying to assess it.
So I've been duped. Everybody's been duped that owns their home.
And it's a self-inflicted dupe because we've taken the information we've been spoon-fed by those with a vested interest in lying to us and never bothered to verify for ourselves whether or not they were telling us the truth. And the proof of that is right there in your hands.
I'm guilty of that. I mean, I didn't know anything about a land patent, didn't even know what a land patent was or they existed until a few years ago when you and I were having breakfast. And I don't remember how the conversation came up, but you told me what to go look for.
When you and I first met, and you were actually introduced to me by a mutual friend, Ray.
Ray.
And in one of our first conversations, when you took us all out to dinner, I brought up the issue of the land patent, and it seemed to pique your interest then. And this was several years ago. And this is just an example of people actually look at the information that we provide on our show, rather than just assume that they know and understand. If they will actually go look and verify, they're going to find out the same thing you did. You are being lied to, and I'm not the one that's doing it. The people that you're trusting as your source of information are a corrupted, polluted, poisonous fountain of non-knowledge. Okay?
Well, it was coincidental that you had brought this up because this has always been a pet peeve of mine is property tax, because I sit there and think to myself as I get older, I've purchased this home for my family to live in. What happens if I'm hit by a car tomorrow, I'm dead, and they have no way to support themselves and can't pay property taxes? They lose the roof over their head. That should never happen. If somebody owns their home, that should always be a place that they have and no one can ever touch. Maybe you can't pay the electric bill, maybe you can't pay the gas bill, that's fine. But you have a roof over your head, you're not stuck out on the curb. And it's really angered me, to tell you the truth.
Right, and it should.
And because I think that's a catastrophe that we're going to be coming up on soon, because I see a whole generation that's not going to be able to pay property taxes as they retire. Well, they're not even going to be able to retire. And I don't know, it seems to me there's going to be a huge, I don't know how to put it, just a huge influx of a generation that won't be able to continue this. And then what happens?
That's what's being counted on, that everything becomes property of the state. That's communism right there. When it all belongs to the state and the state has absolute rule and control over it, that's communism. And that's exactly where we've been headed for decades.
Right.
It's the whole reason for the McCarthy era politics. It goes into the bar associations. McCarthy was after the bar associations in America because he designated them in a full report as communist organizations, and he was right. everything that the legal profession is foisting on us through court opinions, the laws they're writing, and everything else is a complete setup for socialism leading into straight communism. The state owns and controls it all. In the hands of a very few will reside all the power, and the people will be left out in the cold once again. We're turning ourselves into the new Russia.
You know, it's funny. My dad told me 40 years ago, when I was a young teenager, he used to always tell me that the way the system is designed, that the United States eventually would be a socialist country. It has no other direction to go. And he used to sit there and think. It used to always make me think, I wonder why he's saying that. And he used to kind of explain it to me, but I never quite grasped it. But I'm finding out he's right.
Well,
and he used to say there's no other way for it to go.
I would argue that it's going to shoot straight past socialist and go straight to communist. Because
What's the exact difference in those two?
the socialist
they're interlocked
concept
in a
is
way,
the
right?
idea that the people have mutual ownership of everything and therefore mutual control of everything.
Okay.
Okay?
Which isn't the way it works in practice.
No, and it's never worked that way. It works in practice the exact same way communism does, except there's this illusion of control that the people are allowed to have.
So they're going to preach socialism to get you to fall for it, but you're going
wind up
to
in
step right
communism.
over that into
Yes,
communism.
There is no
I get
way
it. I
around
see
it.
what you're saying.
Because even at the heart of socialism is a small group of people with their hands in everything that control everything else that's going on. And they're the only ones with any real and true power. Because in the socialist society and the communist society, the people have no means to enforce their rule. They will be disarmed. That's a mandatory plank of socialism and communism. They have to take the guns.
Take the guns.
That's why gun control is such a hot agenda. They cannot implement all of those communist planks into our society till we don't have guns. That's the only way they can get it. And as long as we're armed, that won't happen. It's the entire reason Japan swore off ever invading the U.S. Their emperor said straight up front, I will never invade the United States. There will be a gun behind every blade of grass. And that is why. If they can't get the guns, they can't push us over that brink. And that's why gun control is such a hot agenda for them right now.
Well, it's also why the educational system has to dumb down the population.
It has dumbed down the population.
It's done a good job of that already.
Flat Earth. There you go. Enough said on dumbing down the population.
Well, the idea is if it's not only restricting information, facts, how things were created, why the country was formed the way it was formed, but also to steer people away from critical thinking, right?
Yes.
So that they don't even have the curiosity.
Yes, and there is an actual research study that was done on a subject just like that. And the research subject is very straightforward. It's a group of monkeys in a cage with a ladder and a banana tied over the top of the ladder. And the way they configure this situation is that anytime a monkey tries to climb the ladder to get the banana, they're hit with ice cold water out of a high pressure hose, okay? And then what they'll do is they'll gradually replace one of the monkeys with a new one, and the new one will attempt to get the banana, and they'll repeat this process. Pretty soon, all the monkeys that are getting blasted with the cold water start to beat the one that climbs the ladder, okay? They assume the role of the person with the hose to keep the monkey from climbing the ladder so they don't get hosed.
So now you have juries they pick that hammer the monkey that wants to climb the ladder.
Bingo.
Wow.
Not based on law, but because they are following that
Yes,
rule.
there is
so
an-
you're going to follow that rule.
There is an
even if
actual
it's not a
real
law.
life experiment with those monkeys
Wow.
setting up exactly that
Wow.
situation.
Wow.
And that experiment is the modeling of
I'm going to
American
try that on my
society.
kids and the neighbor's kids.
There you go. It works at home.
And it goes into great elaborate detail over the different ways they configured this. But eventually what it comes down to at the end of the experiment is that all of the monkeys that are in there eventually are replaced. So no original monkey that's in this cage has ever been hit by the cold water. But they all know don't climb the ladder. They don't know why, They know there's a banana up there, but they know don't climb the ladder.
Do they form a religion and start praying to the banana?
Didn't get quite into that stage, but it's,
Wow.
if you look around, that's where you're living now. You're living in that monkey cage.
That's where we're living. Don't climb the ladder. Well, this has been a really, I love sitting here talking with you. We're not done. We're not done here. We've got a more to talk about. So, but we'll save that. We got some things to do. First thing, we have to run down to the land patent office so that you can speak for me. Get this patent brought forward. And,
I'll see what I can do.
And we'll get that taken care of.
Where can we find more
Where
stuff
can we
on
find
you?
out? Yeah, where do we find out more?
Again, you can go to my legal blog, Tao of Law, TAOOFLAW.wordpress.com. You can listen to our radio show and the archives of our show on Rule of Law Radio and LogosRadioNetwork.com.
And your show is funded by donations?
It's entirely funded by
So people need
donations. Everything we do is
Valuable
donation-based,
information.
and we can't survive without them.
Very good.
Fantastic. Very good.
All right.
All right, guys.
Good job.
Thanks for having me.